Thank you, and it's great to be back. Last year I was here with Jeff Burns announcing the project we'd done together on open pediatrics. We'll talk a little bit more about the evolution of that in a couple minutes. But given that intro, I thought I'd actually start with another Tom Watson quote. I know one in particular that has always motivated me, which is that all the problems of the world could be solved if man would just take a moment to stop and think. It was a very famous quote that ended up in a logo that on the desks of IBMers around the world when I joined were these little plaques that said think. And you still see that when it's referred to IBM all over the place. And that's tied back to that original quote. What I'd like to do right now is introduce a few concepts, and my colleague Dan Cerutti is going to actually show you a little bit of what we've been doing with Watson in open pediatrics. But I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, and I think that panel set it up really, really well. All right. We are in the midst of an explosion of information, an explosion of data, right? That data is going to overwhelm just about every profession that we can think of, including this one, right? What we've been focused on in IBM is starting to figure out what new class of tools need to exist to help us as professionals deal with this information glut, this information overload that's going to occur, not to replace us, but to help us, right? To help us understand how to deal with the information, make sense of the information, and use the information in the care of patients, in particular in healthcare. We believe this is the beginning of a new era of computing. There's only been two prior eras. The first era was the late 1890s. There was a class of machines that were built that were called tabulating machines. They were the original computers. They were mechanical devices that counted things. They punched holes in cards. Those cards were collected. They were put in boxes. The boxes were stored in big buildings called warehouses, and that was the introduction of the term data warehouse. Right? It goes back that far. But in the mid-century, we went through a transition where a researcher looking at or listening to human voice singing on magnetic tape realized that if you could put voice on tape, you could put data on tape. This was a little bit of a problem for us because we made all our money on the cards. But we did make the decision to move forward. We put the data on tape. Since the data was now on tape, we needed new devices to read that data, and that ushered in an era of what is known as the computer era, the generally programmable systems that we have been living in for the last 60 years. Right? Every device we carry is just a smaller, faster, better connected version of what was invented in the 1950s. Right? So we've been on an ever-going march through miniaturization and higher speed communications across the same basic model. But this information explosion is changing the way we have to think about systems, and we're moving into an era where the systems are going to become information-based systems as opposed to program-based systems. The information becomes the big thing that you have to deal with, and moving the information around is going to become very difficult just because of the size, right? So we started working on a problem that was introduced right about the same time as that magnetic tape. A gentleman by the name of von Neumann, who created the modern computing architecture, the zeros and ones that we all know are underlying these systems. And he said in 1947, someday computers will be able to answer any question. And for 60 years, people were trying to figure out what he meant, all right? Because no one could figure out how to program a computer to do that. In 2006, end of 2006, a group of researchers in IBM decided to tackle that problem, which had become known as the open domain deep Q&A problem. And those researchers were locked in a room about the size of an average conference room. And every once in a while we'd shove pizza under the door to keep them going. But they, 2 years later, they emerged and said, we think we've got it. We think we understand how to solve the problem, but the real issue is no one's going to believe that we actually solved it. So they had a colloquium on cognitive systems. They talked about the open domain deep Q&A problem, and what they did was get agreement from everybody there that if someone could build a system that could successfully compete on the game show Jeopardy, you didn't have to win, but compete, that would be an adequate proof that someone had solved the open domain deep Q&A problem. So the team, first of all, they got it in writing. They wrote a white paper and they got all the academics to sign it so that there was no mischief about whether it was solved or not. But then we had to go negotiate with Sony, and we had to figure out that we could actually play the game Jeopardy, which was a little different. And we aired the television show in 2011 in February. It was taped in late January. When we entered it, we had no idea whether we were going to win or not. It was really close all the way through. It could have gone either way. But what the system demonstrated was the ability for a system to process massive amounts of information and come up with answers very quickly. At the end of the game show, when we won, we started getting phone calls from organizations, but they were different organizations than we expected. The first phone calls were from doctors. And the doctors were intrigued by what they saw. They weren't intrigued by the game show. They were intrigued by that box that's on the bottom of the screen. And they wanted to know, how did we come up with the list of those three top answers? They wanted to know, were there more answers? And we said, yes, there's actually thousands, and they're rank ordered. And then they wanted to know how we came up with the confidence level. And the confidence level is actually based on evidence. So from a doctor's viewpoint, the light bulb kind of went off, because they thought about it and said, well, that's what we do. We generate hypotheses about what can be wrong with a patient, and we support those hypotheses with evidence. Right? So they wanted to know if we could adapt the system to healthcare. And one of the first doctors we worked with was Dr. Herb Chase at Columbia. And he had a problem that had bothered him since his residency 35 years prior. It was a case that took over 5 months for them to get through and come up with the right diagnosis and treatment, and the patient almost died along the way. So they trained, we had an initial medical system load into Watson, and he fed in the information he had as a resident when that patient first came in. And the first things that he had thought of and had tried actually came out as the top answers. But what was interesting is the ultimate diagnosis came out as the fourth answer on the list. And from a doctor's viewpoint, he said, if I'd have seen it in that first week, I would have done something to either rule it in or out. Right? So that was kind of a clue that we had something that might be useful in healthcare, right, as we looked at this. So we started working with Memorial Sloan Kettering. We worked with payers like WellPoint, Cleveland Clinic, MD Anderson, New York Genome Center, now the Mayo Clinic. We're now working with the Veterans Administration. We announced that yesterday. So we're moving the system in to help doctors deal with massive amounts of information. And we're moving beyond the Q&A system that was in Jeopardy to other components as the system evolves. Working with Cleveland Clinic, we've built a reasoning engine, an engine that doesn't take questions, but it actually takes problems. And we're using the U.S. medical licensing exam as the test questions, right, to see if it can reason through a case, to figure out how to guide a medical student through differential diagnosis as they learn to use new technology in learning the art of medicine. So we realized that to come up with a one-page summary to feed into a reasoning engine, you need to be able to take those hundreds of pages of EMRs that we heard about in the last panel and turn that into a problem statement that can go in. So we actually turned the system around and built a summarization engine called EMRA that can take an EMR and generate a one-page summary of what's going on with the patient, not by taking the clinical data alone, but actually interpreting the nurses' and doctors' notes that are often left behind in those systems and putting that to work in the system. So we've started to build out the system. We've built a discovery engine that we're now working with in life sciences to help do drug discovery. In that case, you're not trying to find an answer, you're trying to find the white space. You train the system on all existing chemical compounds, all existing patents, which is always important, and you start to look to navigate through the places that haven't been tried before. So we think that we're at the very beginning, the cusp of something that's going to change. And the reason it's going to change is this little chart here. This is a chart that represents the growth of data. And everybody's seen exponential charts for years. It always shows out the fullness of time. The scary thing about this chart is that's 2020. That's 6 years from now. We think there's a lot of data today. All of those medical devices that we just talked about, the people swallowing the nanoparticles that are going to feed off more information, the wearables we're wearing, the mobile devices we're carrying, are generating massive amounts of information that's just going to explode. What's in essence happening is we're digitizing the physical world, including humanity. And that is going to drive so much information that we're not going to know how to deal with it. We've got to take the big data that's created. We've got to use analytics to turn the data into information. And what we believe is that cognitive systems are going to turn the information into knowledge. And that's the next mile that we have to go through. So what we believe is these systems are going to become our partners. They're going to work with us to help understand all of the things that are going on around us to help us make better decisions. We think we can use these systems to help enhance, accelerate, and scale expertise. One of the things we're doing with the cancer centers is how long do you think it takes to train a world-class oncologist? 25, 30 years to get to that level? What do they do after 25 or 30 years? They retire, right? And we start over again. How do we capture the expertise? How do we capture the best practices of some of the world's best doctors in a system so that they can help scale to places where they aren't? That's what the projects have all been about. We're working in medicine and healthcare. We're working in life sciences now. We're working in law enforcement. How many people have seen cold case TV shows where we feed lots of information into, and that don't get solved, and the way they get solved is someone sits down and reads all of the information and finally connects the dots? We actually think the system could do that, and we're working with law enforcement agencies now on how that can be done. Financial services, we're working with wealth managers. I know no one here wants to deal with their money, but we're trying to figure out how these systems can capture what's going on in the world around us and help wealth managers understand our risks, our portfolios, what we're interested in, to help them help us make better decisions based on what's going on in the world around us. And I think the legal profession is ripe for a pretty major disruption here as well. The amount of information being produced across all of these different professions is outstripping the ability of the professionals to consume them. And that is the precondition that we believe is necessary for this next generation of system to evolve, right? We're going to evolve these systems to help us. And to help me show what's going on, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dan Cerutti. Thank you.
I'll take that clip in, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I rarely enjoy a panel and agree with it so much as I did with that recent panel. I found myself agreeing with about 80% of the points that were made, even the contradictory ones. Healthcare is going to be disrupted. It's being disrupted and you don't even know it. I'm a big believer of that. It isn't about the generation of data. We're generating plenty of data. Mike showed you that. It's about what you do with the data. And so I'm going to talk about a systematic approach called Project Careplex that we're doing with Boston Children's Hospital to use data analytics to try to accelerate this transformation in pediatrics. It'll apply to all medicine, but we're going to start in pediatrics. So I'm going to take you through that. But before I get started, I want to give you my perspective, a personal perspective. I'm honored to be here as a partner of Boston Children's Hospital. My association with BCH goes back 20 years. I'm not a doc, but like most of you, I'm a parent, or like many of you anyway. And my daughter was diagnosed with severe scoliosis when she was a youngster. She was treated at BCH for 10 years. She finally underwent relatively severe spinal fusion surgery. She's wonderful. She's a doctor. She's a surgeon, and she's studying to be a pediatric surgeon. So she's going to try to give back. So BCH and Harvard Medical School changed her life. They saved the life of my nephew. My nephew, my sister's son, was born with basically no left ventricle, something called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. He came to BCH. Over a period of a few years, his heart was reconstructed with an innovative surgery that a few years before, the mortality rate was close to 100%. But somebody had the courage to try something, and they saved his life. Now, my point is we're lucky. I know we're lucky. And most children in the world do not have an opportunity to come to Boston Children's Hospital or some of the other fine institutions that many of you work at, right? And that's what we need to talk about. CarePlex is about taking this knowledge and taking this data and sharing it across the world so we can give every child a little bit better chance. Right? CarePlex is a vision. It's a shared vision, actually, between Boston Children's Hospital and IBM. And it's motivated, I think, by three things. The open pediatrics work that we've been doing together for 4 years now. We have learned a lot. There are over 3,000 users on Boston on open pediatrics, and they tell us what they need and what they want. And the list of what they want dramatically exceeds the list of what the system can do today. So we've got a long way to go. But we learn a lot from those kinds of experiences. I've also had the opportunity to go inside Boston Children's Hospital and see some of these innovative projects. Dan has welcomed me in and showed me some of these things. And I'm blown away. These are innovative kinds of things. The question is, how do we get them out? Right? And so CarePlex is a project to try to do this. As Mike said, we've learned a few things. I've been working on Watson for Healthcare for 4 years with the institutions that Mike named. And whether it was Mayo or MD Anderson Cancer Center or UPMC, I learned over time that the vision is pretty much the same. These major academic medical centers, mostly academic medical centers, centers of expertise, are facing a very interesting challenge. They can't treat all the patients they want to treat, not even close. Right? And you can't transport everybody to Boston or Pittsburgh, wherever the case may be, Houston. Right? So what they're trying to do is figure out how to package their expertise, their intellectual property, and their doc's time, and get it out, right? Get it out to the world. And that's the problem we face. And there's only one answer for that. The answer is a technology platform. And that's what we're going to work on. And that's the motivation for this kind of stuff. So we believe data and analytics, and again, it's the analytics, not the data. We've got plenty of data. And the issue is what you do with it, and how do you make it usable? How do you get it? How do you get all sorts of data? And we're going to talk about the different classes of data in forms that people can do something with it. And people range from patients to parents to docs to nurses to everyone involved in this kind of thing. And this is a tough set of problems. This is not an easy set of problems. This is a journey. Collaboration, enabling secure, trusted collaboration is a big deal. And enabling ongoing education, taking advantage, right? And educating. We can't educate enough docs in the world today. Right? So this is what Project CarePlex is all about. Before I talk about the approach we're taking, let me remind you of the problem. Right? You all know this. We are overwhelmed. No clinician has a chance. Medical knowledge and data doubles every 4 years. And we're not even talking about whether they tried to read the entire medical history in a complex case. We wouldn't even think of doing that, of reading an entire case. Why not? Machines can do that. A lot of it's pertinent information, right? So we are overwhelmed and we know it. Another factor, not good or bad, but reality, is that medical knowledge is by and large centralized in the world. It's in big academic medical centers and practices and with folks who have scale and are able to learn best practices and share best practices and document guidelines, et cetera. Right? And that's reality. And one of the consequences is that care is still mostly local. And it should be local, right? But the expertise shouldn't be local. Right? And so these are the kinds of things that we're focused on with the CarePlex project. I noticed last week, I just saw the announcement that the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary announced that $840 million, I don't know if any of you saw that, $840 million over 4 years, $210 million a year, is going to be made available for projects to advance this transformation, if I read it right, in 4 areas: information, communication, coordination of care, and EHRs. Right? So the U.S. government has a role to play in this, and people are thinking in similar ways. However, despite people thinking about this, I'm always reminded of a fact I learned a few years ago. 270 million kids on Earth have no access to health care services. 270 million, that's sad, right? In Niger, a country that has 6.6 million kids, there are 30 pediatricians. 30, there's 30 pediatricians in the room here, right? So we have a ways to go. And I think the only way to get there is to share information and democratize medicine. So Bill said earlier in his talk, and he said it so well, imagine, dare to imagine. So let's talk a little bit about where we are today and where all that data is. Right? Where do clinicians, by and large, get their information? Well, the first source is patients and their families. And, we're not always honest and we're not always right. I had a very interesting case last week. I went in for some x-rays on yet another back injury. And my orthopod has known me for 20 years. He's done 4 knee surgeries on me, but he had not done the back surgery that I had. So he's looking at the x-ray and he says, you got something going on with your L5-S1 disc. And he said, we got to get an MRI. And I'm looking at the x-ray and I said, well, I had surgery. And he said, oh, yeah, well, that explains it. You had surgery. He said, you didn't write that on the form. They gave me this stupid form to fill out. Not stupid, it's just a... So under surgeries, I wrote too many to list, right? So that's a trivial thing, and I'm actually coherent enough to know what the issue is, right? He shouldn't have had to read it, right? I shouldn't have had to write it, and he shouldn't have had to read it, right? Let a computer check my record. He knows I'm in for a back injury. There's a chance that my surgery, that the record on that surgery is relevant for this. We can figure that stuff out, right? Second source is these monitors that we talked about. Wonderful, right? No human being has a chance. That's a machine problem. Use machines to do it. We will, right? EHRs, wonderful advancement. The repository of all information on me, mostly, sort of, except for the biomedical stuff that I just told you about, right? They're great, but I've talked to I don't know how many, hundreds of you, and it's not easy to get exactly what you want out of it. You get up to 100 notes, you got to push a special button because you got more 100. I don't know who's reading 100 notes. Right? Some cases have 1,000 notes, right? So we need machines for that kind of stuff. There are curated sources. UpToDate is a wonderful, I use them as an example. A wonderful source, but UpToDate information or WebMD or any place else I go is not about me. That's general clinical information. It's not about my case. And that's a limitation. It's also, there's a time lag. So it's a great reference. We can use it, right? Google is a source if people put good stuff out there. Includes the bad stuff they put out there. You got to get the keywords right. Most good information is actually not on the web, and it's not about me, right? So where do you go ultimately? You go to your colleagues. Those are the experts. So is every clinician able to get to the right colleague at the right time? That's a tough problem. Maybe we can build a platform to help that. Open Pediatrics taught us that there's a need for this kind of stuff. So imagine we took all of the collective information that exists in these sources, right? And put a machine on top of it. Right? It's a simple concept, and we started to do it. We've been working on it for 3.5 years. Right? Take this information and put a machine behind it, and get the best doctors and the best hospitals in the world to help you figure it out, to curate this information, to train Watson. Right? That's what this project is all about. Right? So let me talk a little more. If you built such a platform, if you got all that data, what would you do with it? Well, this is a very small smattering of use cases that we've talked through with clinicians. There is no end to what I think you would do. The first and foremost, what you would do if you had an information source and a machine that made it easy to figure out what you wanted, is you'd answer whatever question people had. Now, who's people? Patient, patient's parent, clinician, specialist, just an attending who's not familiar with the condition. It doesn't matter what the question is, right? Because all the information is in there. You can get the information if you want. The question is, how do you figure out how to do that? Okay, so can we build a platform that has a front on it called a trusted advisor, and you go there and you ask? But there's people behind here. I don't mean people answering the questions. I mean people making sure the right kind of information is there, right? It's trusted. It needs to be secure. To hold patient information, it needs to be secure, right? We know how to do that stuff. Privacy needs to be respected. There's issues between different countries. There's regulatory issues. We can solve all those problems, right? Not a day, but we can solve all those problems. Right? These are just examples of the kinds of things. And I'm going to show you a little scenario where I can show you the use of some of these use cases, right? How would you go about building such a system that we are doing? The first thing is you get this kind of information, right? Best practices, guidelines, every report, clinical trials, everything written. Notice that a lot of this is in text. A lot of this is in text, and so Watson gives us a chance to do something with it. So you collect that information, it's doable, we've licensed a lot of stuff already. You add educational materials, that's easy enough. They're probably created ongoing, so you get a system and a process to create ongoing small snippets of education. You get patient data. Not an easy problem, right? But a solvable problem. This is where collective will matters, right? This information exists. We've been talking about putting it together. It doesn't need to be consolidated and put in the same record. It simply needs to be made available at the time, maybe in a transient way when a clinician is dealing with it. This is a solvable problem. What's the next thing you need? You need a set of people. You got to have people who figure out what information you go get, right? And what it costs and getting the right rights and all that stuff. Again, manageable, right? You apply the technology. Mike talked about it a little bit. I'm sure that most of you know about Watson. IBM and other companies have all the big data analytics technologies that we need. That's not the issue. Watson solves the big problem, which is dealing with the unstructured, the notes basically, and the journal articles and the clinical trials. So we've got technology that knows how to deal with this information, and we need to start putting it to use. So we're going to build a platform with help from the best experts, I hope. And that platform is going to have 4 pillars. Information, which I sort of just talked about. A collaboration fabric, a secure collaboration fabric, so that you can do online consultations and second opinions and stuff, right? An education module, which is what we learned, an ongoing education credited module that we learned from our work with Open Pediatrics. And then high-value clinical services. There is no end to high-value clinical services. Whether it ranges, it ranges from taking a patient's readings, vitals on some monitor, and bouncing them against the aggregate knowledge that CarePlex has acquired for the population so that I can benchmark a patient, right? I can understand where the norms are. I can understand what the right interventions are when you exceed some of these norms. And there's no end to the vital functions that are monitored. So these are big data problems on a platform in an ecosystem, right? And this is the kind of platform and journey we've started on with CarePlex. Now, I'm going to try to show you this. Is this working, Jim? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to just try to give you a little taste of what this might look like, right? We've been gathering use cases, and so I got a little vignette here. This is a mock-up that we use to try to help us understand the problem better. So the story behind this is there's a doctor, Dr. Jamal, who's in the Philippines, and he's been treating Tanya, a 10-year-old with type 1 diabetes, for a few years, and her condition is worsened a little bit. He suspects she might have Addison disease. It's a complex case. So what does Dr. Jamal do? Right? In the future, I hope, Dr. Jamal goes to CarePlex because he's a member of the community. And he asks Watson, right? You start talking to Watson. And Watson should respond, unless Watson is busy with another patient. Right? So this is an example of a dialogue. And this kind of dialogue we have with USAA and some of our other partners in our oncology project. So this is a dialogue between Dr. Jamal and Watson. Watson has all this information. It's finding relevant passages for the condition. Now, at the same time, what's happening is, and this is dynamic, on the right side of the screen, you see that Watson has identified that there are particular attributes of this particular condition, including the fact that it's a girl, that are important. So Watson has figured out that certain things matter more than others, and these bubble to the top. And there could be 4, there could be 20. All that stuff is programmable. Right? On the left side, what you're seeing is a list of resources that these 10 the categorization represents 10 resources. I don't know if they're right or wrong, right? But based on the systems that we've seen, these are the kind of things that clinicians think about, right? And we'll figure out all these interfaces. The red numbers dynamically are the number of articles, right, that Watson has found that appear to be relevant. So if the dialogue went on and it turns out that Addison's disease was ruled out, there's a bunch of stuff that would probably be dropped out. Right? So this is a dynamic system, again, sitting on top of that huge corpus of information. So Dr. Jamal says, it looks like tests are very important. Right? So I'm going to see what Watson has to say about tests. So this diagram is based on a piece of work IBM Research has been doing with some of our clinical partners for several years about this very complex problem of displaying, somewhat simply, right, this multivariate situation. Right? You've got symptoms, you've got conditions, you've got drugs, you've got therapies, you've got a lot of stuff going on in any case. And what you have to try to figure out is what's related. Right? Now the good news is Watson has all the data. The bad news is this is tough, so we're going to probably spend a lot of time trying to get a bunch of these interfaces right. But in this case, what it says is it says that based on observations and input, right, which is sort of the brown stuff on the left, right, these are key factors. The green elements on the left were taken from the medical record. So, you know, Watson has built a dynamic, it's not the EMR, it's taken information out. Watson has built a dynamic medical record, and it knows what's important, right? And there'll be lots and lots of different ways to display this, right? But the point is, Dr. Jamal has loaded into CarePlex some notes, some amount of stuff. Now, ultimately, I'm hoping that the hospital that Dr. Jamal is in will have done a quick and dirty integration, and the EMR data is available not in real time, but in batch mode, right? So in this case, let's see if I can figure this out. How do I make that go away? What do? The back button. That's not good. Tanya. Very good. We got UI issues that we're still working out. Or it could be that I'm not a doc. A doc would figure that out. I'm not a doc. Right? So what has happened, though, and it's just important to understand the concept, right? Watson understands the inputs that are important. And Watson has discovered that Addison's disease and thyroid dysfunction, among many others perhaps, are conditions that deserve some attention. And it doesn't cut it at 2, but if the confidence level on these 2 is high enough, it'll display only 2, right? So these are 2, and Dr. Jamal is now going to look at this, and he notices that 21-OHA, which is an antigen, is something that he probably needs to learn more about. So he says, Watson, what evidence led you to believe that? And Watson says this, and you can click on it, you can read the article. So you can now do discovery from this system. So our vision is that a clinician will spend time getting comfortable with what the situation is. So in our little story, the clinician says, okay, I think I got it. I need some help. So what it has done is in the background, Watson has found the experts that are relevant for this particular set of conditions. And in our mock-up here, the little logo here says that Dr. Chung is a member of the CarePlex community. And we hope someday everybody is a member of the community, right? Dr. Edwards is a member, but not online right now. Dr. Tay has said, I'm available for email and I'm available for chat, but I'm not available for a second opinion. My hospital is not yet signed up for formal paid-for second opinion. And Watson finds, in addition to the doc putting their profile up the way they do in open pediatrics today, Watson will find information about their practice, anything they published, stuff like that, right? So this is a system where we can sort of manage the community and encourage the collaboration. Right? So in our story, Dr. Jamal says, I'm going to contact Dr. Tay, and does an email chat offline, right? I mean, through the system, secure email chat, and discovers that their suspicions were correct, and they need to do a formal second opinion. And they notice that Dr. Chung, who's in Singapore, is the best match. Probably geography played a part in this. And they contact Dr. Chung, and they do a formal second opinion, right? Probably paid for, right? Between the hospitals. And in that case, they probably loaded more information in about the file. They loaded all the notes in, uploaded them. And Dr. Chung, ends up transporting, which is another service that would underlie a system like this. Tanya is transported to Singapore. She is treated. She was a candidate for an insulin pump. She got an insulin pump, and the world went on. Now, Dr. Tay, Dr. Chung, and Dr. Jamal now have a platform to keep in touch with each other and communicate on the care of Tanya. And so to finish this story, I can go back and look at Tanya's record. And so what Watson has done here is, it's said on the right side, for this particular condition, here's a bunch of notes that are relevant. Right? And I can look at this lots of different ways, right? But the thing that's going on is Tanya now has a glucose monitor, which generates data. And that data is uploaded automatically into CarePlex. And based on CarePlex's work with thousands of patients who have glucose monitors, we know where the norms are, and we know what interventions make sense based on the best practices of the clinicians who are working in the community, right? And so you have an opportunity to monitor her work and to monitor her progress and intervene automatically online. It depends on what interface you want to look for. This kind of platform is doable. The data is all there. It's our will. So our will to build this kind of stuff is what we're here to do today, right? We can build a system like this in a couple of years, right? And it'll be a journey. So the final thing I show you, well, I can show you a couple more things. So this is an example of checking on Addison's disease. So if you clicked Addison disease, obviously the notes would be different because certain stuff is relevant and less relevant in this particular case. So you get a feel for the way the system would work. The other thing we would try to do is make sure that over time, as Dr. Jamal or his residents or interns studied the case and learned more about this situation, they got credit for the education work they did. So this should be a system that has ongoing live modules, structured curricula, less structured curricula, and you get credit. You get CMA credit when you go through this. So we're building this system. What it takes to build this system is data. We can get it. Technology, we got it. Right? Investment, I'm not worried about it because we can obviously add a lot of value. The money will come, and BCH and IBM are going to get us started. Right? And you. It takes a community, right? And so what I'm hoping to do is to talk to some of you over time, and hopefully somebody will engage with us. As a pedestal, we're showing our Watson Oncology product at the pedestal, and Anthony is also here with an iPad, and he can sort of show you more about our thinking. So I hope this is the beginning of a journey. It's going to take years, but you sort of got to go. I remember the thing that I don't know who said it, probably a lot of people said it. It takes a village to raise a child, right? I think it takes an ecosystem, Sandy, right, to treat all the children in this world. So that's Project CarePlex. Thank you very much for your time.